Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Canty, and this is another episode of Living Enlightened Every Day. And I love to help people integrate spirit, mind, and body in order to live each day with that deep sense of passion, purpose, and fulfillment. I love helping you find others that are out in the world doing just the same, like minds communing with like minds. And today I have with me Patrick Paul Garlinger. He is a former academic and attorney, now an award-winning author, spiritual teacher, and intuitive. He experienced a profound spiritual awakening in 2010, living in ever higher states of consciousness. And in 2016, his kundalini awakening opened his psychic faculties, and he channeled a trilogy of spiritual works. We'll be talking about his latest book, Endless Awakening: Time, Paradox, and the Path to Enlightenment. It's a guide for spiritual seekers who find themselves stuck on the path and offers paradox. Yep, paradox as a way of moving forward. Patrick also offers intuitive readings to those seeking to connect with the divine inside of themselves, and he teaches courses on intuition and the spiritual path. He has quite the story to tell. Stay tuned. I'm Elizabeth Canty, and I am here with Patrick Paul Garlinger. And together we just invite you to take a breath, be still, be right where you are, and take this all in, knowing that there is something incredible, there is something wonderful for you about you in this podcast that is just about to be revealed. So, with that open heart, let's begin. Welcome, Patrick.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
I'm really excited. And I want to share with you how I really found you. Your latest book is called Endless Awakening
Mhm.
and Time, Paradox, and the Path to Enlightenment. My book is called Living Enlightened: The Joy of
Mm.
Integrating Spirit, Mind, and Body. But the original title was Enlightened Every Day. And I
Mm.
feel like Endless Awakening and Enlightened Every Day have the same intention. And I was just so excited. I was like, if that had come to me, that would have been the title of my book. Because I feel exactly what you wrote about, and hopefully that's present in my book too, is that it is um, not somewhere we get to,
Yeah,
but this constant present moment unfolding of life, of beauty, joy, peace, prosperity, everything.
it's exactly right. And it's every day. And I love your title too, because it is every day that we start over, we wake up and, we do our best to inhabit and be present and in the present moment. And stuff happens, emotions percolate and challenges arise, and we don't arrive
Yeah,
anywhere at
that's
this
right.
final destination where we're like, my work here in a human body on this planet is done. And now I'm enlightened, the Buddha, whatever you want to call it. But like, school's done. That's I've graduated. Not yet. We're
No,
here.
yeah. I love that. And I love that it's that you mentioned this in your book, the fundamental paradox. Uh, how can I be whole and broken, awake and asleep at the same time? And then you said, we're God, spirit, life, universal presence, trapped in an hourglass.
Mm,
It's
yeah.
like, that's it.
That's
The
it,
paradox.
that's the paradox. And when we can really hold all of that, yeah, parts of me that are still healing, what we call whether we call it trauma, whether we call it being in separation, and the part of us that's whole, our soul, our spirit, that, you know, when we connect to it, we're like, why was I worried? Why was I angry? Why was I this, that, or the other? You know, that it's perfect peace. And then we go back and forth, and it's like, yeah, we are timeless beings, and we are in these beautiful bodies that are like an hourglass that will end no matter what. It's the one thing that we're all guaranteed, right? We will all, as an experience, leave our bodies at some point.
Yeah. And I love that. That was just beautiful. But I want to jump back to how this all started. Were you always interested in a
Mm,
spiritual path or awakening?
no, not at all. I don't know. That is one of the wonderful, the beautiful things about my life story, is that I was not at all. I was very, very close-minded, very rigid, and very much eh, attached to um, intellect and a certain kind of academic success.
Oh.
Why I became an academic initially as a professor. And now, from my current vantage point, I understand the path that I was on was really healing my father's lineage, that portion of my history. But I was very closed off. I thought anything remotely spiritual, psychic, mystical was all just, you know, a fabrication. And then the universe said, guess what, Patrick? You sweet little Patrick, you can wander around the world believing that and thinking that, you know, your academic credentials and trying to be smart is like all there is to life. And guess what? We're going to show you something else.
How did the universe show you that?
Yeah, well, the universe, as a friend of mine who's a wonderful intuitive and medium, said to me when I first met him, he looked at me and goes, wow, the universe really just took a frying pan up to the side of your head. And it did. The universe was basically like, we've been sending you messages. You're listening to just a tiny portion. It's really time to wake up. And it was. So my path in retrospect began in Atlanta, Georgia, where I was living. And I went to the gym where I was, you know, a bit of a gym bunny, which people who know me today are like, really? You were ever a gym bunny? I was. And I went in, and there was a power yoga class. And of course, being of the mindset that I was, like, oh, power yoga. Oh, that sounds really like, you know, I'm going to prove myself. And I said, can I do this? To the front desk. And they said, oh, yeah, anybody can sign. So I signed up, and this class destroyed me. Like, I was like on the mat sweating. And it turned out it was an Ashtanga yoga class by somebody who had studied Ashtanga yoga in Mysore, India, and was using Sanskrit language. And I was like, what is this? And so from there, I discovered meditation, first sort of basic mantra meditation, and then Zen. And I was sort of getting little tidbits of wisdom. I learned about the law of attraction.
Hmm.
But then I thought, oh, this is just a wonderful way to sort of be successful in the world.
Of course.
Of course, you know, it's like, oh, well, I'll just, you know, I'll manifest the life I want. And I wanted to be successful, and I wanted to be a Supreme Court clerk, and I wanted to do all this. So as I was after law school, basically, I went through just a horrific dark night of the soul where my world fell apart. Like, everything fell apart. I mean, essentially, without sugarcoating it, I had a nervous breakdown. And the universe was like, you are now going to realize that everything that you thought about yourself, you were not seeing much of anything. Yeah.
So I have an interesting question. I've never asked this, but the way
Yeah.
you said that is inviting me to ask this question. Do you think if we don't listen to those subtle things that the dark night of the soul has to look like that? Meaning, for some
Mm,
others, it's not quite so dark,
right.
but for you, I mean, I can just feel in the way you were
Yeah.
saying that it was devastating. And when we use those words, you know, nervous breakdown, you know, that break with everything that we think we know is
Yeah.
broken, and we're lost. And And because you weren't listening, do you think that's how it is? Or do you think,
I do, you know, and in retrospect, I've often said to myself, you know, why couldn't this been easier? You know, I was very close. It's very funny when I tell this story to people. I was actually very close to not going on to law school and becoming a lawyer, but actually going and becoming a yoga instructor. So there was a part of me that was being pulled to that path.
mm,
And I said, no, 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 I'm going to be a lawyer. I mean, these are so divergent as far as paths go, right?
right?
Right. You know, you can't pick too many other, you know, choices that are really far apart on the spectrum.
Yeah.
And the reality is I couldn't have done it otherwise. And because if I had, I would have made that choice, right? I would have made that choice. And sure, it's fun to think about sort of in a multiversal kind of world. Is there a version of Patrick that chose that and has lived a very seamless, like just everything blossomed in this very natural, organic way without any upheaval? I couldn't. It simply was the case that that was my karma, and I kind of accepted that as not looking back and going, oh, you missed the signs, oh, you weren't open enough. It just who I was, and just reminding that if I could get through that, like literally, I can get through anything. I mean, I really thought that my life was over. I thought that I was going to end up in like a mental ward. You know, I was so unhealthy.
Mm.
And then all sorts of healers and mediums and psychics show up. It's just like the world just showed up. And it was a lot of serendipity of seeing a friend who's an acupuncturist. He's like, you should go see my friend, the medium. And that's the medium that says, oh, the universe has really hit you upside the head. And I'm like, I know. He's like, you're gonna be fine. And then here comes like an Indian divine mother. And I just everything opened up in a way that was I was so open because I was literally cracked open that
Yeah.
when the mystical experiences started happening, I was like a shell that was just filled in a way that sometimes if we don't have that, and I'm not advocating it, it's everyone's on their path.
Of course. Yeah.
Um, that you know, it can still be hard to fully open. In a way, I went through something that I don't recommend in the sense of like don't go out and try to have a really rough dark night of the soul, but it just was my karma and
Yeah.
I had to accept that path.
As you were describing being cracked open, there's something in that space that I recognize for myself, that there's so little resistance because there's no energy for
Yeah,
resistance. There's
yeah,
no energy for judgment. It's like whatever, but chiropractor, acupuncture, medium, healer, sure.
yes,
Because nothing else works. That the
exactly.
pill or the yoga class or the psychiatry, or
Yeah,
psychologist, it's like, okay, I'm doing that. That's not helping. Why don't I go see this medium? Why don't I? So there's not so much resistance, and when we're cracked open like that too.
exactly. And the beautiful thing is that it did show me, and I didn't understand this at the time, but it really did show me that first paradox of being really shattered
Mm.
and whole at the same time. I mean, there was a part of me that was completely resilient and whole and just kept bringing these people and these experiences to me. And then, over months and then a couple years, really got back to a level where I felt just back to being me, but a whole new version of me. I didn't have any of the nerves or the symptoms or worries about where I was going in life. Um,
That's really beautiful. I mean, just that, sticking with the process and allowing life to show up
yeah,
and offer you that healing
that's right.
and be present to it. I mean,
That's
because
right.
I guess because you can't do anything else.
Right. Well, thank you. And for anybody out there who's going through a rough period, it doesn't have to be of that magnitude.
Right.
It's something that's happened in my life many times. It's this sense of like, just keep going. Just keep going. Don't give up. a sense of resilience and trust that it can look really bleak right now, and your life can turn on a dime. I mean, like literally just divine grace can show up in any moment, whether it's just a person, an event, something out of the blue. And so even since then, my life has been unbelievably beautiful, but it is not devoid of challenges. And there are stretches of my life where it's what's going on? And I have to just trust. And then all of a sudden there's this shift that happens.
Yeah.
So it was a wonderful lesson in really being held and carried, even if at the time I didn't understand that that's what that was.
I know people are always going through something different, and
Mm-hmm.
it's never going to look the same, but at the same time, it reminds us of something certainly that we're going through, and knowing that there is that place within us that can contain our pain, our
Mm-hmm.
sorrow, our grief, our loss.
Mm-hmm.
As we surrender, that sounds like again, just surrendering to it, trusting that process, that's huge.
It is, and that's why, um, again, the kind of paradox of like we can hold all of that, and when these things arise, it's not necessarily an indication that things have gone wrong, that we've messed up somewhere, like that somehow we've gotten off track, because it would be really easy for me to have fallen into a sense of trajectory, like, oh, I went through this really horrible experience and have these beautiful mystical experiences, and now I have this incredible connection, so my life should be utterly seamless at every moment, like everything should just open wide up, right? Because like you have, and underneath it is this deeper belief that it comes from surrender.
Mhm.
And with that, the trust of like, whatever it is, I ultimately know it's for my higher good. I just have to trust that part of the process, that even though it can feel like, oh wait, what where did I go wrong? Have I fallen, you know, uh am I falling backwards in some way? When people are like, oh, my vibration's falling, like we can sort of kind of couch it in a sort of certain language of like, oh, my vibration's dipped. Not necessarily. I mean, sure, look at that. Look into if you've fallen into an old pattern.
Oh yeah.
But when something happens in your life that's like a big challenge, it's like learning to meet that with the same kind of grace and equanimity and trust.
It's really interesting. You said somewhere in your book, so you say that there's a lot of talk about maintaining or achieving a frequency or vibration. And you said something, your frequency is measured by your capacity to remain aligned with your soul and in balance, even under these whatever circumstances that our ego or other people around us certainly want to
Mm-hmm.
agree that are bad. And it
Yeah,
sounds like, for me, I believe that we can be upset, we can be sad, we can be disappointed, angry, in grief. And that essence that as we spoke, the essence of our being is large enough to contain it all. So aligned with our soul doesn't mean, I always use this example. The hurricanes don't come; they're coming.
they're
It's
coming.
part of life. There's
Yeah.
earthquakes and storms, and I always use nature as an example because
Mm-hmm.
it's such a wonderful example of how we can't control with our vibration or frequency everything in the universe. We
Right.
can really be in our highest vibration in the hurricane, in the storm, in the upset, in the loss.
That's right. No, it's
Yeah.
100%. And to sort of rephrase my own writing, and in line with what you just said, if we're talking about our vibration, it's how we're meeting that hurricane, right?
Mm.
When we're meeting the hurricane with like, oh no, why is there another hurricane? I know that, oh, my vibration's drop. I haven't been meditating enough. I haven't been doing this. That's not meeting the hurricane. That's, you're judging yourself, you're chastising yourself. And so, yeah, at a certain point, we accept that these things come into being because they're not in our control. And if you do believe that they're ultimately for your highest good, whether it's an old pattern, something that you're still healing, karma that has ripened, if we want to use that kind of framing, it's like, oh, it's time to address this part of this life or a past life. You got to meet that. And what I love about nature as a analogy or metaphor, because we are nature, we're really extensions of the earth when we're living in these bodies, is that, the trees aren't like, oh, that wind, wait, what did we do? All right, everybody, we manifested the wind and they're knocking us over.
This is
The hurricane.
bad.
This is
Right.
bad. The trees aren't doing that. The ground's not doing that. I mean, so we can take from that really it's about meeting all of it as with as much love, and as you say, holding that within, that we can contain it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful. You talk about time, and it's something really interesting for me. I've never really spoken much about this experience that I've had, and your book reminded me a lot about it, the time paradox. Um, you you talk about the difference between being in the present, which I always use the body. The body's always right here. The
Yeah.
mind can go back and forth and go wherever the
Mhm.
heck it wants to go, but the body's always in the present. But being present, so you have a distinction between being present and being in the present.
Mhm.
And I think that's a pretty big distinction for people. Do you find that in your practice?
Beautiful question. Thank you for bringing it up. Being present versus being in the present. So I don't want to, get too bogged down and philosophical about it, in the sense of a distinction that, am I in the present? Am I being present? But, on the one hand, being in the present, we are always in the present moment. As you say, the body, and I love what you say, the body's always in
Right
the
here.
moment, right here, right here. And in a way, then, as we know, one of the sort of spiritual tenets, there really is only the present moment.
Mhm.
And at the same time, that present moment is past, present, and future all at once. And so we're always in the present, but we're not always present. We are
Right.
all over the place. And so that distinction was simply to, a lot of people could, you are always in the present moment. You could say, I'm in the present moment. And your mind, as you rightly point out, is anywhere but the present.
Yeah.
And at the same time, because what's happening in the mind is only in the present moment, generating images of the past or, fantasies about the future.
Yeah.
The mind is in its own way, always in the present moment, but it's manufacturing these other moments in time, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so we can be present to what's going on in our minds, even if what the mind is generating is an image of the past or an illusion of the future. And we do that in meditation, right? That's actually really important. It's like, oh, look at me, I'm revisiting this memory, or I'm thinking about what's going to happen, and the mind is doing that.
Yeah.
The difference is when we're interacting with the world and other people, are we present to them, or are we layering over them the past? And that's where I find happens almost all the time, is that, for me, one of the great paradoxes is that we're always in the present moment, but how we perceive and create the present moment is a replication of the past. And where that comes in most poignantly is that our interactions with people, where we sort of see them through our memories and our interactions, and then we make assumptions. And so it's sort of, can I be present to somebody and
Without
hold
without the past story of who they remind me
who
of.
they remind me of and that interaction we once had? And at times we have to maintain that, right? We can be in toxic relationships with people where they've been incredibly harmful, and we should learn, like, this
Yeah.
person is this way. And and so I'm not recommending that people ignore that. But
No.
a lot of the time, our interactions don't reflect the fact that this person is much, much bigger, much fuller than our very, very limited perception of them. And so, again, if we can hold both, it's like, I know this person, and there is like a multitude. There's so much to this person that I don't know. And can I be present to that possibility, seeing something, being open, what else they might share, while my mind is still kind of locking them a little bit into the past.
As you were speaking, I was just imagining this we're connecting on this human level, on this mental or emotional level, we can expand it out a little bit. And then spirit is connecting with spirit in this great expansive level. So we can love everyone, but we may not like them.
That's right.
But we really can. Which for me, that means my heart can stay open while I discern if this person is going to be in the same manner as they've always been towards me, which may be toxic,
Yeah.
and I can decide to let go of the story that I have around someone that I may not even really know, but I've
Mhm.
attached a story because somebody else told me a story or because
Right.
something in their past. And so it's like I can kind of trickle it down from love and discern really that present moment interaction without fear of them
Right.
hurting me, because really, again, in that state of love and openness, n- no one can hurt that. Now our emotion or our attachments, people can break or betray or things
Mhm.
like that, sure.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, that's a discernment, I think, to be aware of.
Absolutely. I fully endorse what you said. There's no reason that we have to love everyone equally in the exact same way. That love can remind us that um, not every relationship is going to be of the same depth, that I'm perfectly capable and entitled to draw boundaries if necessary, while also honoring that this person is equally divine. That's the thing, is that, wherever they are in their path. And in a way, I remind myself frequently of how I was before I went through my journey. That version of me was not always kind, it wasn't always nice. And yet then within me was still this capacity, that ultimately the universe, spirit said, hey, we're going to show you this side and why this version of you is so attached and so angry and so needy in its way. And so it just reminds me of like the person that I'm interacting with, where I have a story. And I'm sure a lot of people had stories about. And based on those interactions, and many of those stories are probably valid, right? But if I were to meet somebody today, I wouldn't want, from that era, I wouldn't want to be locked into that story, right? Like that story is a very old story. And so it's good to, we remind ourselves of like, this is where they are. And I don't have to love that version, in the sense of like, I don't have to accept it, not draw boundaries if somebody's being cruel and mean. Um, but I have to keep open. This is where the love comes into what you're describing. The possibility, I don't know what spirit has in mind for this person and what they're going to happen. I can't force them to wake up, but maybe they wake up and in 10 years they're, on a whole other path where they then clean up all the stuff that they're doing right now. And that's to me is the great paradox of kind of being present to them and not locking them into the story that I'm telling right now.
Yeah. When I was reading your book, it reminded me, I had this experience. It was almost like I'd had it so many times, but then it became a sense of reality. And I was walking my dog where we lived. There was a big lake the house before where I am now. There was a big lake in the front, and it was a really windy day. And I was walking my dog, and we used to kind of just go sit on the edge of the lake and just stop for a while and be present. And it was a really windy
Mhm.
day, and there were kind of white caps and waves just coming towards us, and it was a really long, long lake. And I heard the question, oh, my mind loves to play games sometimes with me. And so it was a fun question. It was like, when is a wave not a wave?
Mm.
And I was like, I know that. And I'm playing. I'm like, when it's the ocean. And as soon as I said that, I just kind of dropped in, and I could see all these waves, and I could see like millennia moving in time.
Mhm.
And I could see where I was here and there and there, and it's all moving. And I was like, my mind wanted to identify, like it's all moving forward. And as soon as that identity kind of came up, those were, I don't know if they were words or whatever, that sensation, that feeling, it was, it was like, it's not moving forward. It's all happening right now. I
Mhm.
can
Mhm.
see it all.
Yes.
It's moving, but it's not moving forward or backward, or, and that was this really interesting moment of that idea that time is a construct. And then there was layers. It was like the top of the wave and the middle and the bottom, and then deeper and then deeper and then deeper. That, like, that, it was the whole metaphor. It just kept expanding into this. I was like, oh my gosh. But it changed deeply
Mm.
sort of a concept that I had around time into, maybe a knowing. I don't know how to. There's no real words, but it's being in it rather than knowing about it.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, I was just shown all that in 2.8 seconds or whatever. I don't
Yeah.
know, whatever it was.
Yes. Exactly. No, 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 exactly. I have a similar experience of sort of being on the train one weekend after some very deep um, uh, spiritual retreat, and being on the train and having a moment where I was the landscape and all of it, like time just stopped. And it was just for a couple seconds at most. Time was gone. I was the landscape, I was all of it. There was no separation and there was no time. And then came out of it when I was like, wow, what was that? And then back in time. And so, one of the things about that is that we can touch, it's a moment of grace of touching the timeless like that. And sometimes it's, as your experience so beautifully, Till, having just a moment, that's like some internal dialogue and insight, a response internal where you answered, and then like the mind opened up or relaxed and let go of time.
Mm.
And when we can touch that, it does, that just reminds us that we're actually always living in separation in time, because the body is in the present and it's going through all of its processes, and we are quote unquote aging. We are constantly negotiating the construct of time
Mm.
with each other all the time. And part of the beauty of the path is living within the construct of time, knowing it's a construct. Or the way my guides talk about it, when I channeled my first set of books, they talk about it as an agreement. An
Yeah,
agreement being
love
a
that.
fundamental aspect of it, like an agreement being a kind of like a constitutive base thing, like physics. It's an
Yeah,
agreement.
right.
We can't no amount, we can touch time as much and fall out of it as, we're all going to come back to living in time no matter what. You could set as your goal, like, I'm going to meditate every day and I'm going to fall out of time and I'll have these moments. You are going to come back into time at some moment. The body is going to need to eat. You're gonna,
And that's why I use integrating spirit, mind, and body, because if we weren't meant to be in the body, like you said, aging in time, making agreements with others, we wouldn't be here. We would be out of the body.
exactly. We would
Yeah.
be elsewhere, and we and we wouldn't have that experience. We've agreed there's a reason we're in our bodies and we're meant to be them, and they're meant to be finite.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the beautiful thing about having a finite body. I mean, it's such a crucible for all the work that we do. You know, the body being this repository of memory and past lives and all sorts of stuff that we contain in it. And all the kind of experiences that we can have in a body that we couldn't otherwise have, to the fact that our time in the body will end. And, you know, that limitation is one that actually gives so much meaning. I mean, that's not a new insight for me. I mean, the fact that death gives life meaning is such a powerful thing to realize that my time is limited. If we had unlimited time in this body, you know.
I love that. That's a yoga. You know,
Yeah,
to
exactly.
to really contemplate, to really be with the idea that there is the infinite and the finite, and the paradox of experiencing what is finite in the fact that, you know, I can love my dog and my son and my relationships, my family, whatever it is, and everything will at some point pass. Everything will change form,
Mm-hmm.
change, you know, being how it's being, and to really enjoy, to really live
Mm-hmm.
what is now, you know,
That's right.
because it isn't going to be that in a few minutes.
Right. Exactly. It's not going to be that in a few minutes, and it's not going to be that whatever our lives in spirit look like once we've transitioned. It's sort of like we have this body and these relationships and this opportunity now to do all of the work that our soul wants to do here. And a lot of that work is actually joy, as you just alluded to, you know, joy being such a fundamental part of what it means to be alive in a human body. I don't belabor the end of my life, but it's a very powerful thing to really get in touch with death, your fear of death, just the reality, and then be like, okay, how am I going to use my time? What am I going to do now?
Yeah, well, it just reminded, I did study with a teacher who practiced, you know, death yoga would be the translation. And so,
Mm,
yeah, it was like, I mean, not like you said, not belaboring it, but as a practice for a very, you know, 6 months, it was life changing. It was
yes,
formative because,
good.
yeah, there's just so many insights around being present to what is and understanding that it's changing in time as we are in time, but connecting to what is changeless, you know, what is
Yeah.
timeless, what is formless. And that I can't, the paradox, I love that's in the title of your book. It just, I love the whole title of your book.
Thank you.
Perfect. Just, you know, time, paradox. Oh, and the path to enlightenment. So
Mm.
is that where you are now? Now you mentioned channeling. Is it your higher self? Do you have guides? How does that work?
Yeah, so my experience has been one of initially having a Kundalini awakening and starting to channel. And I downloaded 3 books in 6 months and published them over time. You know, spaced them out. And I've got some other channeled stuff in there, but my relationship to that evolved. So I have my own team of spirit guides that are much more like, you know, worldly, like, you know, impulses, things like that are sort of guiding me on a sort of more day-to-day mundane level. And then the channeling happened at a very intense level where the beings that identify themselves, they call themselves the Council of Light, but never heard of them. And then later my teacher was like, oh yeah, I know that. And there's somebody else out there in the world who also channels them. They were much all about the sort of wisdom and the metaphysics. I mean, it was all about understanding time and reality and consciousness. And since then, I've continued to have my own sort of energetic evolution, things being rewired and stuff being pulled up and worked on and lifted. What's interesting, because you ask higher self, I actually had an experience a few years ago where all of a sudden I felt this sort of energy come in, and it was slightly different from what the energy felt like when I've channeled or just stuff's being worked on. And I realized it was a higher self integration, because
Hmm.
I had never felt more like me than I had ever felt in my life. Like there was had healings where I've received energy and it felt beautiful, but it had a particular feeling and valence and quality to it, sometimes more electric, sometimes hot. This was like, I've never felt more me in my entire life. It was a beautiful experience. It lasted like 10 minutes.
Hmm.
And all it did is just add to the sense of possibilities of the kinds of mystical and energetic experiences that we can have. I don't know that I've quite answered your question.
Well, yes, it's interesting because I speak with a lot of different people who have these different paths, Akashic records, mediums, channeling entities
Mhm,
and groups.
right.
But I feel like my book and actually most of my talks, um, they feel channeled.
Mm,
I don't sit down and say, I'm going to write about, I wish I could actually say, I'm going to write about whatever this thing is.
right.
I don't feel like a writer,
Mm,
something has to come to me, which is why I don't have my podcast come out when it's me on time sometimes, because I'm like, come on, I'm like waiting around, spirit, inspire me, do something, somebody do something. And I laugh, but it feels very kind of what you were saying. It's like this higher part of me, but the part of me
mm,
that knows that it knows.
you're right.
So I can't say that it's a group or an entity or anything like that. And I have had some experiences around that, but that's not where my book or my writings
Right.
come from. And it just feels, I love how you said more of me. And the word that came to me when you said that was, for me, it's empowered, because
Yes.
I haven't always felt very empowered in my life. I've
Mhm,
always felt like I'm waiting or watching or hoping. And
yes.
that empowerment is sort of the, oh, I don't wait for anything. I am. I'm being.
Mhm,
I speak my word, and I create and I give, and I don't even have to receive, because
right.
it's giving to me through me. I don't have to receive
Exactly.
back out here.
Yeah.
And
It-
so,
well, that's beautiful. And I think the way I would sort of draw on my own experience to sort of offer a parallel is that, I had the channeled books, and they were very much like, this is not me. This is coming through the crown chakra. I'm feeling this energy. I'm like typing frantically and writing, and it's like, if you looked at it, it was like full of typos. I'm just like downloading like crazy.
yeah,
And it wasn't me though, because it's a different voice. It was a very strong, very powerful, loving, but also very, as I've likened, it's like divine father. It's like, we're cutting through all the BS. We're just
we're not
stop.
messing
We're
around.
not messing around. You do this. This is why you do it. That's what you get. Here's what you need to do instead. It was very powerful and very direct. Same as it's not my voice internally. And then when I set to write Endless Awakening, which was kind of my own integration of a lot of the lessons that I had learned from that, and sort of the way I took that material in. I sat down initially, I actually just started writing very short pieces that, like you, I felt inspired. I would like write little articles. And then after, I can't remember, it was probably like a couple years, I woke up one morning and literally like I had an outline in my head. It just all came together. I was like, I literally woke up in the morning and I was like, this is it. And these are all the pieces that are basically forming this book that I had sort of written without having a book in mind. And then when I sat down to write it, I really wanted to find a voice that felt like me. And so it's, I mean, if you read Endless Awakening and you read it next to any of the channel books, you're like, I don't know who this writer, like these are not the same writer. And they're not, because that voice, the kind of voice that you found, is that voice that's sort of like a version of our higher selves, a part of our higher selves. It's like unencumbered by effort, by trying to do something, like work. It all just came, and that sort of sense of flow, which is a version of channeling, right? It's you, it's all kind of you, as opposed to an entity or another being. I have enormous respect for those sorts of channelers.
Oh.
I've never been one to channel publicly like that. Like I don't do trance channeling. I don't connect. I actually just work on a claircognizant level. Like when they want to give information, I either hear it and I just ask a question, or I just read and it just happens, as opposed to my mind kind of being set aside, which is the way it was when I download stuff for them. But I've learned to sort of know the difference between when it's my higher self coming through and it feels a certain way versus the channeling. And I think that whatever happens for people, you know, that piece of you, that higher self, that's the part that we all have the capacity to connect to. And, you know, I'm sure this is what you were describing. It's just, it feels so effortless. It just flows, and you're like, and it feels just right.
Yeah, the effort is in correcting the typos.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
As you were saying, I believe that we are all always connected. In other words, even squished into these little finite bodies, our eternal, timeless, selves, if you, that's a weird word, but whatever, spirit is,
Mhm.
we're always connected. It can feel through, as we were speaking about earlier, life situations, circumstances, certainly judgments, and our own self-judgment. It can feel like we're not connected,
Mhm.
but life, as we invite that connection to open up, life will accommodate us. But you point this out in your book, and you've mentioned it earlier, is that sometimes healing doesn't feel good. It
Right.
does not always feel really good.
Yeah.
So people get a little maybe confused or disheartened
Mhm.
when what looks to maybe a spiritual teacher, someone like yourself, that you say, no, this is what you asked for. It's coming up
Right.
to be addressed, to be healed, to be honored, to be loved into wholeness,
Yeah.
rather than what we humans love to do is push everything down and pretend like it's not there. I'm going to stomp on
Yes.
it,
Right.
sit on it, make sure it doesn't rear its ugly head.
That's right. Yeah, it's true. And as you were asking this question or making this observation, I had two different thoughts pop into my head. One is that, you know, when it comes to healing, I have enormous respect for the ego's capacity to sort of, find ways to sort of tamp things down. And it's constantly looking to rebuild itself, and our defense mechanisms come in. And so we have to kind of accept that, there's going to be a part of us that is, in one way or another, finds a way to sort of not let everything out all at once, and go back. And so then it'll come back later, right? And that's part of the cycle. It's like, oh, okay. The other thing is that, all of us, each and every one of us, is constantly evolving, because we are always connected. And essentially the world that we're experiencing is all designed to get us to come back to that sense of connection and wholeness and fall out of and get away from judgment and separation. And so when we and this comes up all the time in readings. It's a little bit of the Einstein principle. You can't solve the same issue at one level of consciousness, the level of consciousness that created it. So we all have these constructs or frameworks or ways of being in the world, ways of even approaching the stuff that we do that get replicated.
Mm.
And we don't even think of them as things to be healed, right? So like the stuff that has to be healed, like, oh, this event happened in my life, or I have this deep belief systems that that causes me a lot of pain because this event that happened when I was the stuff that we call healing, yes, keeps coming back. But we have these constructs of even ones that feel very empowering and very positive that we wouldn't even associate with healing.
Right.
Needing to heal, right? That we still have to kind of transcend because they're the things that are actually in the way. So what happens all the time when people come to me, like, this is where I'm stuck. And the approach trying to get unstuck is the sort of way of seeing it and the actions taken and the thought processes around it, all that sort of the machinery that it currently exists, your current consciousness, trying to solve that problem is the dismantling of that machinery, which can't happen, right? It can't take itself apart. But
Well,
that is the thing that we have to kind of accept is like, oh, wait a minute, maybe the way I'm doing things, my very outlook is the framework that's going to go now.
Well, I had this image as you were speaking of that of this sort of these arms and a machine, all kind of holding this container in the middle, and we're all pointing to the container. I want to get rid of the container. I want to get rid
Yeah,
of that event or that moment or that memory or that person, like that.
right.
And you're like, wait, you can't, nobody can reach that. It's
Exactly.
all it's really held tightly in there,
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that itself is not causing any problems. It's just a thought. It's an idea. It's not happening now. But
Right.
everything's holding it in place, like where it can't move.
Yeah.
And I guess the uh the spiritual story is the thorn and the side, and you just protect it, nobody can touch it, and you can't, it just festers and grows because and you just keep building on top of it so it doesn't get hurt. It's like
Right.
the thorn really wasn't the problem. It's all this stuff,
With all this other stuff. That's
yeah,
right.
you're piled on top of it so you can't reach it.
Yeah.
You can't just go and pull it out.
Yeah. And a lot of it is that we have these ways of doing things in the world, whether it's, we process information in a particular way, or we have a commitment to certain sets of beliefs and practices, and we're going to do them in a particular way. So, the here's an example that's not based on anybody, but it's sort of the person that's like really committed to meditation, and they do it every day, the same amount of time, the exact same time, because they've been taught like, consistency, the same time, and they do it, and they do it, and they do it. And now they feel stuck or they feel bored, and they're like, I'm not making progress anymore, right? It might be that the thing that they need to let go of is the very part of their identity that was built around progress comes from doing things consistently every day the same way. So you double down, you're like, I'm going to meditate more, and I'm going to be even more committed. And it's that piece that's actually saying it's time to let me go. And that's the part that it can be hard to see sometimes, where we can't see ourselves. And then even then, so you tell the person, okay, you need to let go of doing things every day in the same way, that sort of rigidity, say it's rigidity and with a tied to sense of progress, because that piece of you, it's constantly measuring is now what's being asked to be transcended.
Mhm.
And then they go to transcend it by trying to make the effort to be like, they do it the same way. You try to transcend that with, I'm going to make effort, and I'm going to be really rigid, and I'm going to measure my progress. How am I transcending? And it's like, it actually just needs to be evaporated. Like there's
Yeah,
some part of you that turns it over and be like, I can't solve this. This goes back to surrender.
absolutely.
And it's like these things, when you kind of turn them over and you're like, hi, I actually can't solve this part. Like my mind can't get me to where I'm supposed to go. And it's going to constantly try to hijack the mission, that
Yes.
you're going to go, I got to turn this over. I got to turn it over.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I'm laughing because that's has definitely been me in times of my life. And I can remember I'm doubling down, I'm going, I'm just gonna meditate harder.
Harder. Exactly.
And then really waking up to like, oh wait, that's not gonna do it. I mean, that's not even the point. What am
That's not the point. And we
no,
all have them, myself included. That's part of the life too. It's like stuff happens, and what we've been calling the hurricanes or the challenges, and sometimes it's like that's the piece of you, and it might even be, I don't know, it might even be that like you don't even see a hurricane, right? Like that you've gotten used to being like, I can handle hurricanes. I'm really balanced when I see a hurricane. I can soldier through like, whatever it is, that like at some point, some way you go about meeting the hurricane, it's like it's time to transcend that. So when these things happen, it's usually, your soul, the universe, however you want to think, finding a way, getting you to sort of transcend these things. And we don't always get the message, myself included. We have blind spots.
yeah. Well, I think that's the thing about being in and with like minds, surrounding yourself
Yeah.
with the books. And we've talked about that on this show a bit, quite a bit, because while people are going through the dark night of the soul, or people are going through those struggles of I'm going to just meditate harder. It's nice to hear that someone else has gone through it, and that there is sometimes a word, a phrase, a chapter in a book that
Yeah.
can remind you of what you can do for yourself in
Mhm.
this situation.
That's right.
And honoring that, to find our joy and our passion, which is, being, for most of us on this path, it's being in this place where I can see what's right in front of me, be present to what is right in front of me in this body, in this world, and connected to what I would call source or spirit or my higher self, and allow that flow of
Mhm.
information.
Yeah.
So I'm accepting, I'm being with, and surrendering to what new way of being in this situation might be for me.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so surrounding ourselves with these podcasts, with these books, with intuitive healers, and I think it's very powerful now. We're becoming more open
Yeah.
as a community,
Right.
get to learn about each other, and find out these wonderful ways of allowing ourselves to be the
Mhm.
wholeness that we are.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's astonishing to think about how available information is these days, and how much further like disseminated it is in the world, and how much more is open to you, to all of us, than it used to be. I mean, the older models of schools and lineages and traditions and ashrams and places that you would go, and it was, we didn't have access to podcasts and books in the same way. And it's beautiful to look back at that and think about the constraints and the effort that it took. And to me, there's some real honoring of like people before us who managed to write books at a time when nobody, we have we're in an era where, this isn't obviously universally accepted. There's a lot of people that would still say, I don't know what's going on. This is, woo woo, or, they would disparage it, but far less than it used to be. I mean, the people that really blaze trails, you have to honor them.
Absolutely.
And now recognize like what's available to you is just, it's astonishing. And yeah, as you said, when you're looking for something, wherever you're at in your journey, like the means by which the universe can send you messages and information, it's really quite astounding.
Well, I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions about your teaching, what you're offering right now. First, what does it mean for you to be a modern teacher, spiritual guide?
It's a great question. When I left the law, I was told it's time to leave. Like, I got the message multiple times. It's time to go. I got them in short order, and I listened. But I was also told, you are not going to know what your path looks like. It's one foot in front of another. It's like, I have to actually live. Now I have to live that path of like being in the present. And I have a very clear mission around the kind of material that I teach, which is endless awakening, the stuff that we've been talking about. The path and what it looks like and where I'm supposed to go is shrouded in mystery. Like, I would love, hello,
Yeah.
hello, I would love the like 5-year plan and the 10-year plan and then the 20-year plan, and tell me what it, and I know that I'm never going to get. I was told, you're never getting, because I know myself. What would I do? And this is the wonderful thing I think about most any kind of future prediction work, is that, let's just say I was told, you're going to create a school and you're going to run it, and like, you're going to have all these teachers and I would probably run out and try to start a school. I'd be like,
Yes.
oh, there we go, right? Like, and that may not be the way it's supposed to happen
And
at
it's going to
all.
be the best school, and it's going to
It's
be
going to
like
be the best school,
this,
and
and
I'm
it's
going
going to
to
be
I'm going to start naming what's a cool name for the school, and I'm going to start the chart. Like, I'm going to just start putting together lots of faculty and blah blah blah. It's like, no, it's literally one day at a time. And so, what's fascinating about that is, I literally sometimes feel like I just walk like this very, like the edge of a cliff, because I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing for the most part, and it's evolved. So to answer your question, my work right now has sort of fallen into sort of information, wisdom, in the form of books or doing podcasts or putting out my own videos, doing one-on-one readings. And that was something that I had never really had envisioned for myself. When I did the downloads and whatever, I wasn't really planning on doing one-on-one readings with people. And that has really just evolved over time, where, the readings got sharper and sharper and much more like direct, of like, here's where you are at the level of consciousness, that like, this is the piece that hasn't been healed, or this is the piece that you need to let go of. And then I teach 2 courses primarily. One is on intuition, because I love helping people kind of connect with that guidance of like navigating your own life day to day, making choices. Because I am not somebody to come to for readings where like, okay, this week,
tell me what I do today, and then tell me
today,
what I do tomorrow.
I've met people, not in my work, but in life, who are like, oh, I have this, I got to call my psychic. And I'm like, oh, no, no, no. Like dependency on somebody else to make decisions for you is not something that you want to cultivate. And so I love getting people to know about their own intuition. And then I do teach a course that's based on endless awakening. That's called Journey to Wholeness. And it's about sort of living sort of self-healing and connecting with spirit at the same time. Not so much with intuition, but really opening to that side of you that's whole and loving and peaceful. And all of that within the sense of I call myself times an intuitive guide, because I'm not really here to, I mean, no way want to be a guru. I don't want, people deciding their lives, based on everything that I say. I want them to take it in. What resonates with you right now, use it. What doesn't, put it aside. And in that sense, just being as helpful as I can to, whoever shows up in the moment. So I wish I had a very clear business plan.
Oh, no, it
But I
wasn't. It
don't.
wasn't at all about a business plan, really.
Yeah.
It's just what you said. I think that was
Yeah.
beautiful. Just being, and I do love and appreciate, because I feel the same way, that I've never had the insight to create very specifically or be told internally, intuitively, this is what you're going to do, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is how it's going to go, and this is who
Yeah.
you talk to. It's really been that one foot in front of the other, that it's like, oh, this. And then I take a step and I'm like, not this. No, okay, turn.
Yeah.
It's like, whoops, I misstepped there.
Yeah.
So I just appreciate that. And I appreciate the people who do have that goal, they do have that plan, and they do have that insight, and that's for them. I've learned for me, and my personal reality is that when I try to make things happen,
Mm,
it feels like I'm trying to make things happen and I'm not
yes,
happy.
that's right.
And my joy is in taking that step. I can look down, make sure I'm not going to step off the cliff, but taking that step and then looking up, and it's like, oh, there's this and this and that, all these wonderful
Yeah,
things in the next step. So that is my joy, certainly. And it is a process of trust
that's right.
and surrender, because most of us, maybe it's by instinct, being in these human bodies, want a plan. I just
Oh.
want a plan. Just have the 5-year plan. So come on.
Exactly. No, I get plans that like, do this now. I'm like, oh, okay, here's what you're doing. And sometimes I have to be reminded, like this is, in a way, I have to step back and go, how I do go about doing this is part of my own blind spots and my own transcendence of like, what part of my consciousness is evolving or needs to evolve or needs to be released as I do this work. And so if I got to flip to the back of the book and see, here's where I go, then, the version of me that would be the pieces of me that would be left behind or evolved from or transcended would be the ones trying to make that happen. They're the ones. And so that's part of the trust of being like, there are people out there who have a very clear sense of what their offerings are. And like they've figured it out. And I'm like, as you said, like, good for you. Like you showed up and boom, you knew exactly what you were meant to offer and you're like taken off. Great. And I'm like, yeah, I'm doing readings and this happens and then a book and then, I've got different projects in the pipeline. I just wait for those prompts as well and just keep showing up. And what I would say to people, because, I left a very lucrative career
Yeah.
that was, in many ways, a much easier sell at a dinner party than what do you do. People might be like, boring, but whatever. It is that you really do want to listen and move when it feels right. I was a lawyer for many years while still on this path and still doing this work. And it wasn't until I really got the prompt, it's time to go, that I knew it was time to go. And again, it's sort of like wanting to be guided, just not forcing it. Yeah, so don't force it. Wherever you are on your path and what you're doing as your work right now and your profession, just trust that it all actually is part of your evolution.
I love that. And we didn't get to talk about that much, but before we recorded, we were speaking about how that many of us, when we find, we have certain kinds of experiences and we feel very connected to, an expanded idea of our spiritual selves, our spiritual integration, spirit, mind, and body. We want to quit our job, or we want
Mhm.
to, be the yoga teacher or the qigong teacher, whatever it is, we want to just jump. And I too remind people that it isn't about what you're doing. It's really about being who you are being. You
Mhm.
can be wherever you are, whatever
Yeah.
you're doing, as a caregiver, as a school teacher, as a lawyer.
Yeah.
And there isn't a, the only time to not do what you're doing is when we're really guided and directed.
Mhm.
I got that from you, that
Yeah.
you weren't wishy-washy. It was like, wow, this is me staying and doing this while I'm on this spiritual path, having my
Yeah.
kundalini awakening, having
Yeah.
my spiritual awakening,
Exactly.
and I'm going to do this case or this law. And that's a
That's
way
right.
of life that's integrating spirit,
Yes.
mind, body, career, everything.
Absolutely. And I read a lot of people who are in all kinds of industries and professions and business, and they're actually where they're supposed to be. They're great. They're doing innovative things, or they're approaching it differently. And when I was lawyering, I was still very much aligned with my values. I have, my own internal values around ethics and integrity and issues of justice. I the time to go, and that's not even necessarily the time to leave that profession. Maybe it's leave that particular job, that employer. When you really feel out of alignment with your values and you feel like you're compromising yourself, what that feeling is like. I was very fortunate that I didn't feel that, and I also, and this is another thing that comes up, is your spiritual path doesn't have to be something that you actually wear on your sleeve. I tell people all the time, they're like, oh, I'm going to this, like, how do I tell people about it? I'm like, do you need to? It's one thing to have a private life. It's another thing to keep regarded as some secret. Secrecy, and this is not an original insight, but secrecy has a sense of shame around it. Like, oh no, if it's revealed, this says something wrong about me. I'm going to be embarrassed. Versus private, you don't have to share it at all. So
Yeah.
go to work wherever you are. Be your spiritual self without having to sort of say,
Your spiritual badge.
yeah, exactly. I'm interacting with you because with this spiritual wisdom in mind. This is why I'm talking to you this way. No, just go be you. That's how angels are, right? Like, just go be you.
Oh, I love that. That's funny. Yeah, talk about at the very beginning of my book that, I had this, of course, wonderful idea that, being enlightened, living enlightened, I'd have this certificate, like, he's enlightened, right? After your title, after your name, it's like, yeah, I mean, not literally, of course, but there
Right.
is something about my name badge, like, hey,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I've arrived, and no, it's living our lives. And I say this often, being right where we are.
Mhm.
fully present, right where we are, doing exactly what we're doing, being with whoever we are with,
That's right.
and seeing and sensing wholeness in it
That's
because
right.
we're whole. So nothing out there has to change
It does not.
until, like you said, until it's not in alignment with this
Right.
in here.
That's right. That is the number one thing. And people come and like, oh, if everyone did this, this is what the world would, right? Like we want to change the world.
Yeah.
And listen, there's a lot of suffering in the world. There's a lot of pain in the world. Absolutely. But when you've done the internal work and you no longer see the world as needing to change, but rather the world being a reflection of our collective consciousness, and that everything that's happening is serving as the moment of awakening for somebody, somewhere, somehow, all of it playing out, whether it's karma, anything that's happening, you can meet it with a sense of love and compassion. And where is it asking you to take action? You know, you're not dismissing the world as sort of like, this is meaningless. I don't care about the world. I'm just going to sit in my home and meditate. But for the same reason that I don't know the end point of where I'm going to end up, I also, it would be hubris of me to be like, this is what the world would look like if it were enlightened. My guys have been very clear. None of us understands what the world would actually look like if everyone would like, if that's even possible. It's like
Right.
you would be trying to construct something, to build something from your present consciousness,
Oh, I
which
love that.
is,
Yeah.
and it's sort of like, in a way, they've said to me, it's like you if you were to see an enlightened world, you might not even understand it because
Mm.
you'd still be seeing it through your lens,
Mm.
or you would see it and still see all the problems because that's your consciousness. You know, you're like, and so again, there's this like trust of like, as you say, living from day to day, moment to moment, meeting whoever, and being like, I'm meeting this with wholeness. I'm meeting it with fullness, and that's enough. As that's enough. Like that's a lot. That's a lot. You know? That's a lot, actually.
It is, but I think we want to make things complicated, but we also want to put things out there. And that's what you were saying is like, if the world out there were enlightened, well, what happens is when the world in here is enlightened, it doesn't, it was it Jay Krishnamurti said, I don't mind what happens. I never mind what happens
Yes,
because it's all happening the way it out there is supposed to be happening.
it's
And
supposed to be.
it's like, so why would I mind it?
Yes,
It's really being rather than wanting, wishing, controlling, making things happen.
exactly. It's funny you should say the way you describe it. It's like it's all that's happening. It's the way it's supposed to be happening. The last book that I channeled was really got into sort of politics, law, society in ways that I was like, whoa, most spiritual books don't go there, you know. And I finished, it was basically a book explaining sort of how all of these structures reflect our consciousness built on separation, and why they exist the way they are, and beginning to point the way of like, what would it look like differently if you weren't thinking in the kinds of terms that you normally think of. And so it was about politics and partisanship and criminal justice. There's a lot of things, but the end of the book, as I'm finishing up, they were like, we have a coda for you. And I was like, oh, and I downloaded this coda that was like, the world's falling apart and it's okay. I was like, okay. But it was all about the message of how we're constantly interpreting the world and evaluating on whether we think the world's getting better or getting worse.
Mm.
We're like, oh, and this happens. That's good. That means that's happening. And they're like, you don't understand the picture at all. And you can't. And, you have to respond to the world, but, understand that like when things happen, you don't see the big picture. And so it's not like you need to oscillate between, I'm really happy because this thing that I thought was good has happened. And oh no, I'm really worried because this thing that I think is terrible just happened. That's you kind of falling into in judgments and a mentality that's like not, it's going to be, you're just going to be ping ponging all over the place. Meet the world the way you do, you know, your inner child or some challenge, the hurricane, the inner child, you meet it with that same sense of like, oh, I'm going to love you. Yeah.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Hmm. Well, this has been so amazing. I could just tell by the title of your book.
So sweet. You're very sweet.
I just knew. But what was the last book you were talking about? Has that been published or is that coming out?
Yeah, no, that one was published. That was called A World Without Identity, the sacred
Okay.
task of uniting humanity. It's a very grandiose title. Now that I think back. And because I don't know that like anybody or the world, you know, a book is going to unite humanity. But it was about, as I said, the looking at these sort of broader structures that we don't often get into in spirituality. We you know, we tend to focus on ourselves and relationships. Maybe we extend to families. Maybe we talk a little bit about community, like we talked about spiritual community and the availability of like, you know, like-minded people now. But we don't necessarily get into things that are very, very charged. And so the book went there. But yeah, that one came out in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic. So
Oh, well, I'm excited to read that. I loved Endless Awakening, so I will definitely look at that. And I that's pretty novel, as you said, to go into that. If I was at my house, I have a million spiritual books in my bookcases, and I have them all, you know, in my Kindle. And it's like, but not one. I don't think, well, maybe one or two or three, somewhat
yes.
touching on it. But I mean, really, when you think about it, there's not a lot out there around that. So that sounds exciting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I can't say that it was book that set the world, the spiritual world on fire because, you know, I think it is very challenging. It was a
Yeah.
challenging book to download, to be honest with you. It was a challenging book where there are moments I'm like, really? Like, you know, I had to honor it. It's also a part of the path, being like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to censor myself. I'm not going to censor. But I was like, you know, as all of my channel books, there's some dialogue at times where I'm like, really? You sure about that? What? Why is that? You know, like you know, Patrick is willing to you know, ask questions.
But I love that. That's the humanity of it.
That's the humanity. I'm human.
That's right. And if you
I'm,
didn't have that, we would wonder a little bit. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
it's part of
Exactly.
the process. Oh, good.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. It's been an absolute such a pleasure, such a gift to be able to spend this time with you today.
I feel the same way. And I'm just going to invite our listeners to reach out to you with any questions or comments. And I'm sure we sparked some ideas, some healing, something. So you can reach out to Patrick. His website is Patrick Paul Garlinger. It will be in the notes. So it will actually flash up on the screen. And his book, Endless Awakening, the one I read, Endless Awakening: Time, Paradox, and the Path to Enlightenment. So that's that. Well, and is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, thank you. Just thank you again. And I do hope that, you know, anyone watching is able to take away a couple pieces, something that helped them today. It's really all we do.
I know they will, absolutely. So I invite you, if you did like this video, to hit the like button and the subscribe button. You'll get all the videos as they come out, and share this with a friend. I think they will find gold in here too as well. Just some beautiful things we touched on today. So thank you for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Canty. This is Living Enlightened every day. And join me every week for a new insight into how we can love our life and live our passion. And remember to laugh, love, and live enlightened every day.